Now, the Senate on Thursday reshuffled the membership of the 10-man committee that would meet with the presidency to discuss gray areas of the tax reform bills. The move followed controversy over the bills, which have been criticized by various stakeholders. Meanwhile, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has taken over a massive estate comprising 753 duplexes, sparking widespread curiosity and questions. Now, this is Standpoint. I am Precious Amai. Thanks for joining us. All right, let's get into the conversation from the introduction. You already know the issues that we're looking at today. First of all, the very first one is the tax reform bills. President Bola Tinubu in July 2023 approved the establishment of a committee on fiscal policy and tax reforms and appointed Taiwo Yedele, an expert on tax matters from PricewaterhouseCoopers, as chairman. Now, 4 months after its inauguration, the 38-member committee introduced 20 policy recommendations tagged quick wins, as they were meant to be implemented immediately. The panel later proposed the economic stabilization bills comprising 4 documents. That's the Nigeria Tax Bill, the Nigeria Tax Administration Bill, the Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill, and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. While the ESBs were approved by the Federal Executive Council on the 23rd of September, President Tinubu had asked the National Assembly to consider and pass the 4 bills. Well, let's delve into this particular conversation as we bring, someone who has very in-depth knowledge of these, the managing partner of Gabe Fashoto and Co., and former president, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, Gabriel Fashoto. He joins me to throw more insight into the bills causing controversy in the legislative chambers, and not just in legislative chambers, just around the country as a whole. Good to have you join us.
Good afternoon, viewers.
So this bill continues to generate controversy. One thought that maybe after the first conversation, the head of this tax reform committee had gone to, that's Taiwo Yedele, had gone to answer questions at the National Assembly, that perhaps it will douse the tension around it, but it hasn't. I just want to get your thoughts on the controversy and tension that this is generating.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's unfortunate that the controversy is bringing along with it certain disinformation and misinformation. But on the whole, I think it's a good thing for the country, because this is the first time taxation happens to be at the front burner nationwide. I can't recall when we are having the issue of taxation to generate a lot of controversy as it is currently. I wouldn't want to bore the viewers on the issues that a lot of people have been saying, but I would like to rather delve into some issues already raised. Let me give this background.
Mr. Fashoto, I will take those because we're going to look at some provisions of this bill, which is why we wanted to explain what it means. But I just wanted to also ask you if you think that these concerns being raised at different quarters, because we've also seen presidential candidates also, weighing into this. If you think that they are genuine concerns, or if you think that basically this is just politics.
I can tell you authoritatively that 80% of controversies going on in the country, they are purely political, while only 20% can actually be given a lot of importance. But the political angles cannot be waved away just like that. Why? Because we are talking about the derivation aspect rather than the revenue generation aspect. I don't think that we are having problems with the revenue generation aspect of the tax reform bills, but rather, how do we share the national cake, in quotes? That is exactly, those are the areas generating, controversy. But as I said, let me briefly go over the 4 bills. I've gone through the 4 bills, and The major one of it is the Nigerian tax bill, which tried to repeal all the major tax laws in the country, about 11 of them, and then partially amend about 15 or 20 other tax laws. But the purpose of this is to ensure that we have one-stop shop for any investor in Nigeria, be it local or international investor, to be able to know where they are going. They want our taxation system to have certainty, which is one of the preconditions for a good tax system. The Nigerian tax bill has been able to pull together all the major provisions of all the tax bills we are currently operating, so that when you pick up the Nigerian tax bill, you are sure of where you are going if you want to be an investor or if you are a taxpayer. Then you have the tax administration bill, which has put together how we do administer our taxes in the country. Then you have joint revenue bill, which is actually giving teeth to the current joint tax board, because the current joint tax board is embedded in the personal income tax, and they are only advisory rather than having teeth to bite. Then the last one is trying to replace the current Federal Inland Revenue Tax Service with Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill, which tend to make it to be a federation outfit rather than a federal government outfit. So that's just the summary of that. And then we are having a lot of lofty provisions in all these taxation bills. It's like restructuring our revenue generation system. But we have to note that the Taiwo Oyedele Committee is not focusing only on the taxation aspect. It's also focusing on the whole gamut of fiscal policies in the country. So that is why the discussion should go beyond the current 4 tax bills, because we still have certain provisions of the Constitution that must be amended. Even this VAT, this value-added tax that we are all clamoring for, as it is now legally, we are operating it under the doctrine of necessity in the country because it negates the provisions of the Constitution. Value-added tax is under the residual list of the Constitution, and it strictly belongs to states. So states ought to be operating it, but because all the states that are supposed to be complaining, they are not complaining. That is why we are having it currently being administered.
Mr. Fashoto, let's talk about that, because I wanted to start from a different place, but you have mentioned it. This is a particular clause that seems to be causing a lot of tension, especially with state governors. It talks about, and that's in the clause 77 of the Nigeria Tax Administration Bill. What it does is to talk about the formula for sharing the value-added tax, which is also the consumption tax. And now it's saying the VAT distribution to the federal government will now be 15%, 10%, from 15%, and then concedes 55% and 35% to state government and then local government councils respectively. But it also provides clause 22, which is where the problem is, subsection 12, that a 60% derivation shall be reflected in the sharing formula of VAT, standing to the credit of states and local government in the spirit of fairness and justice. But a lot of governors are saying, look, that's not fairness and justice, because when it comes to VAT, it is production and consumption. And so for most of them, they do not necessarily have production. And so that's going to be a problem in terms of revenue.
Well, there is nothing in the bills to support some of the assertions being made on this section 77 of the Nigerian Tax Administration Bill, as well as section 22 subsection 12 of the same bill. Why? What that section 77 is saying, that the horizontal share of the proceeds from the VAT should be shared based on 60% derivation. But unfortunately, section 22, subsection 12, does not give broad explanation as to what is meant by derivation. Then don't forget, another fear from another region of the country is that the basic food items are exempted from VAT, meaning that there is fear that they may not have adequate VAT to share if no VAT is being collected on basic food items. That is,
and that's the region where food comes from.
Exactly. So, but the intendment of the committee, as explained in different fora, is that we are not talking about derivation as to where you are collecting the VAT, but rather derivation as to where the economic activities that culminated in the VAT to be paid will be derived. So there are two different things. Currently, we share the VAT revenue based on where you collect the VAT. But that's not the intent of the current committee when these bills are passed into law. So it means that in the north, for example, where we have mostly food items being produced, agricultural items, there is, some of the inputs they are having, they command VAT, and they must have paid VAT on some of those things. It is their final products that will not yield any VAT. But the VAT that have been generated in the cost of producing those agricultural products, they will have VAT produced, which they will share. So that fear should be allayed. And I will, at this juncture, implore the committee to simulate the scenario with live data of the current VAT being shared based on this new formula. That is what I will suggest to be able to allay the fears. Then, as regards the issue of derivation, we have to know that it's no longer going to follow what we are currently practicing, because what we are currently practicing favors only two states predominantly, that's Lagos and Rivers. But with their intendment, is going to be equitably shared among all states of the Federation. And the way to actually allay the fear is for live simulation of the data by this committee. You will see that the fear will be allayed. Then, if you allow me, let me touch on some other fears being raised.
Prof, sorry, Mr. Fashoto, just a minute. we will get there, but I just wanted to stay on this for a while, because you mentioned Lagos and Rivers. But doesn't this also mean that, shouldn't this VAT, that derivation formula, drive governors to increase production activities in their states?
Even at the current production level, states will still get, if the sharing formula is based on the intendment of this committee, states will still get higher value-added tax proceeds than what they are currently getting under the current system. But at the same time, it's also now going to stimulate them to increase VAT production, items that will yield them higher VAT. But it doesn't mean that they are currently producing low VAT command products. So I don't see any fear to be entertained by these people, but the missing link is that the committee is not stimulating the current live data based on the new formula, but rather people are still seeing the sharing formula in the light of the current derivation formula.
So, Mr. Fashoto, one of the things that I also noticed in this, one of the clauses in the reform bills is, like you have mentioned, the VAT for food items. I think there's also renewable energy, all of that being taken out. But the thing is that people are saying, look, if you take VAT for food items out, but you're increasing VAT for other items to from 7.5 to 10%, that at least for Nigerians, what you are trying to achieve in one aspect will be nullified by the increase in another aspect.
Nigerians have choice. This is a proposal, and I'm happy that the committee has said that it's not insistent on any aspect. They are not defending anything, but rather they are explaining the content. So what do we need to do? Let us tinker with some of these provisions. If we believe, personally, I believe that jumping from the current 7.5 to 10% by next year is too hasty. I think that we can still defy it by 1 year. Let us see how we stabilize the commencement of the new bills, the operation of the new bills. Then, by the time we start increasing the VAT, then the economic activities would have been stimulated and everybody will be better off when we are looking at this whole scenario. So I wouldn't think that it's taken from one hand and giving out from the other hand. Because we have to also know that government rely absolutely on taxation, or basically on taxation to fund its operations. That's the only, stable government legitimate revenue source. So whenever we are reducing the revenue for the government, we should also think of how we are going to reduce their responsibilities. So if we reduce revenue from one side, then we have to see how we stimulate economic activities in other areas that will make people to pay more taxes. But everybody, it's going to be a win-win situation for everybody.
I also wanted to touch on a part of this particular bill, and which is the one for me, where I'm wondering how that is going to play out, which is where it requires that if you want to open a bank account, I'm trying to remember that clause now, where if you're opening a bank account, you have to present your tax identification. And I'm wondering, for the informal sector, what that will mean. Doesn't that then mean that for those who are unbanked, you're going to in fact, now we're going to have more monies outside of the bank than even in the bank?
Well, you will realize that majority of economic activities, that is the major ones, must definitely and surely pass through the banking system. I don't see anybody, doing a business of 1 billion naira and is saying that I'll be doing it outside the banking sector. There must be one way or the other where this thing will have to go through the formal system. But as regards that provision, what he's saying is that every Nigerian must have tax identification number. And they are proposing that the NIM should serve as the tax identification numbers for individuals, while the registration number or the incorporation number should be for the companies. But the community is here to come up with what should be the tax identification numbers for ministries, agencies, and parastatals. So they need to come up with that. So with that one, we will have unique identity attributable to each taxpayer in the country. And what does it take? If you have your tax identification number, just like you have your NIN, why are you afraid of disclosing that one when you are opening your bank account? I don't see anything wrong in that. Because of the trust deficit, we believe that any increase in tax is going to jeopardize the interests of the taxpayers in the country. But it's not so. Abroad, we are talking about people paying bills because they have all their basic necessities being catered for by the government. By the time we are having such a situation in Nigeria, then we'll be able to trust government. The trust deficit will be removed. And we will be happy to open our bank account with our name, with our tax identification number, with the registration numbers of the company. And government will get more revenue, and provided they are utilizing the revenue for the good of the citizens, then everybody is going to be a win-win situation. So that would be my own advice.
But, and I hear you.
To go outside the formal system.
And I hear you, but this condition is not just for opening a bank account. It's also for maintaining a pre-existing bank account. And for people who are already, right now, to even get the cash limits, from the ATMs, it's terrible. And then, you're looking for cash, you have to go to the POS. For a lot of people who already, especially what we saw during the cash crunch, where people refuse to put money in the banks, they rather keep it at home because, they will have access to it. Isn't that, are we not at a risk, of pushing that same mindset where people feel like, so if I don't have a tax ID, I cannot operate a bank account, whether I have one already or have to open one, then why do I have to put my money in the bank?
Now, we are delving into the realm of monetary system. You know, we're having the fiscal policy, we are having the monetary policy. It is the duty of the monetary system to ensure that the banks, they have enough money in their ATM, that the banks are carrying out their legitimate duties rather than swindling their customers. So what is happening in the economy now? I think CBN needs to be alive to its responsibility to ensure that the bankers are not taking advantage of their customers. But by the time the monetary policy is properly implemented, fiscal policy, which is the area of the taxation, will be able to complement that area properly. You know, one part cannot be good while the other part is bad. It means that the weakest link, will be the strength of the chain. If the two systems are working properly, that we can say we have a country called Nigeria to our satisfaction. So we shouldn't leverage the weakness in the monetary sector on why we should improve our tax system. Let us go and register our existing bank accounts with our current tax identification numbers. Let the banks, let them do their job, let them provide enough money in their ATM vault, and Nigeria will be better for it. That will be my advice.
But would it not be, and I'm staying on this because this is the one that perhaps would affect, apart from the removal of, VAT from rents and food and all. But I also want to, this is what will affect Nigerians, the most, and when they get to the bank and begin to raise this concern. Would it not be preferable to say, or ideal to say, let's get more people into the banking sector before we begin to, push a policy like this? Because you stand the risk of not even, for those who are not unbanked yet, especially in the rural sector, in rural areas, you even stand the risk of keeping them out and not wanting to come in. And especially with the processes that we operate in the country to even get your name, we realize how difficult that was, let alone a tax ID.
There's a proverb, cutting the head is not the solution for headache, but rather you have to treat the headache. We have examples in the country. During Babatunde Raji Fashola's era in Lagos State, you are aware that a lot of people were willing to pay their taxes. And what engendered that? Because of good governance. That is why I said that the monetary regulators ought to do their job properly and not the other way around. It's not because we are not having good services from the monetary sector and then we think that we will be able to improve things. I don't think that will ever work. If we are waiting until the time we get more people to the banking sector before we expand the scope of taxation, it may never occur because that is not how certain developed countries develop their tax system and they are better for it. So let us do things in the right way in Nigeria. Then Nigerians will be bold enough to call on his government to govern them properly. That would be my advice.
I also wanted to ask, is there any correlation between these bills rather, and then, because especially when you look at where we are in terms of our economy and the stability of our economy?
There's a lot of correlation, but if you will permit me, there are certain things, there are certain misinformations that have been going on in the country concerning these bills, and which may affect the understanding of the community. A lot of people have been asking why the rush and whether the timing is appropriate. I think that we have no other better time than now, because currently the revenue in the country have been declining, except in the very recent time that we have started witnessing improvement. The debt to the revenue ratio was 96%, meaning that out of 1 million naira we are generating, we are using 960,000 out of it to settle our debt. So when we compare the revenue we are generating in the country with what is happening elsewhere, we observe that we are not even generating up to 1/5 or 20% of what is happening in other areas. such as South Africa, such as Kenya, talk less of United States of America and other developed economies. So the inflation rate, which is currently 34% in October, is 5 times the global average of 6%. So are we waiting until the economy in Nigeria is fully grounded before we say we have to reform our system? No. So that is the reason for the rush. And the people appear not to really understand this area. Now, what about the timing? Is it the right time or not? This is the right time for doing that. And why are we starting with the tax reform bills? Because all over the world, there is no taxation without representation. Representation aspect means that the people we elected into the legislature must legislate on what you and me are going to do when it comes to taxation. So that is why we have to do that. Then some people have raised the issue that there is re-emergence of inheritance tax. And they are alluding to Section 4 of Section 3 of the Nigerian tax bill, which says that income of a family recognized under any law in the country will be taxable. This is actually, I absolutely agree with these people because this clause is imported into our personal income tax in this proposed bill. And I suggest that it should be deleted. Otherwise, that will be the re-emergence of inheritance tax. So that section should be removed. Then, some people are claiming whether these bills will impoverish some regions, especially the north in the country. As I've said, I've not seen any area of the bill, that is stating that. The only area which I can allude to their fear is sections 188 and 190 of Nigerian tax bill, which, as I've said earlier, zero rates the agricultural produce, such as food, basic food items. And as I've said, I'm asking the committee, the presidential committee, to simulate with live data what the situation will be under the proposed system. By the time they do that, this region that are entertaining fear will see that they are better off when these new bills, when they are passed into law. So those are the areas I'm aware of that some people are still agitating concerning these new bills.
Mr. Fashoto,
back to your question. Can you remind me of your question?
So you've already answered it. I was asking if it will lead to economic stability, which you have done. But I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned, I was listening to I think it's the General Secretary of the TUC, Festus Osifu, who was talking about the 800,000. So if you earn for income tax, if you earn 800,000 naira and below, you will not have to pay income tax. But people are saying that that's too small, that perhaps, it should be expanded because it doesn't even capture those who earn minimum wage, because minimum wage in some states now is above 80, for some states it's 80,000, which means that annually some people will earn close to maybe 900 and something thousand naira. Some say it should be expanded to as much as 2 million, as much as 1.5 million, as much as 5 million. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, let me correct one impression there. The first set of income that is exempted will be about 1.1 million. We are talking about the percentage of the rent paid, or 200,000. If you add that one to the 800, you are getting something like 1 million or 1.1 million. My problem with that section is not actually the amount. It's not that amount. But the very first set of tax that will be charged immediately after the zero rate of tax, which is 15%, as against the current 5% we are having. It means that after the allowable income is excluded from your income, it means that the first set of taxation that will be charged will be at 15%. That's too high. It's too steep. I don't think we should jump to that level. Something like 5%, they should start with 5%. We say that after the first 800,000, the next one will be 2.2 million to be charged at 15%. I rather think that if they say that 1 million naira the next 1 million naira to be taxed at 5%. Then they can then go to 10% or 15%. That will be okay. And these things should be properly simulated. And these are the things we can propose. I know that some stakeholders are already making amendments to this, and they are ready to submit this during the public hearing at the National Assembly. But it's not that the lowest amount is too low, because I don't see the highest I've seen among the for the minimum wage happen to be 85,000 per month, and 85,000 per month will translate to 1,020,000 naira in a year. So I don't see it as as too low, but rather the very first tax rate of 15% should be lowered to 5%. That would be my suggestion.
So how does this trickle down? Because that's the question, and this will be my final question, in terms of how this trickles down. Two questions in one, actually. For the average Nigerian, I really don't like using the word average, but for lack of a better word, for the average Nigerian, how does this trickle down? And then if we're able to raise the kind of revenue we're looking at with this bill, does this mean that at least to an extent we'll stop borrowing?
Yes. How does it trickle down? You will observe that when this thing is properly simulated, 80% of people paying income tax will be outside the tax radar, income tax radar. But it doesn't mean that they will still not pay tax, because there is no way you will not buy any vatable item or the excise duty item and so on and so forth. But those are indirect taxes. They will not, the impact will not be as heavy as paying taxes on income. So Nigerians, especially the lowest cadre of Nigerians in terms of income, will be far better off. About 80% of them are shielded from income tax. So it's a win-win situation for that particular level. At this stage, I want to say that some people are also carrying wrong information that certain parastatals will be wind up. That is far from the truth. What they are saying is that instead of those parastatals like Naseni, like tertiary education board, and some other universities, and so on and so forth, rather than being funded from earmark taxes, that they should be funded from the budget. And what does that mean? What's the implication? This committee is looking forward to higher revenue comparable to similar countries in the developed world. If we now have higher revenue, we'll be able to have higher income to share. Why are some organizations, or especially government organizations, resorting to earmark taxes, just like Education Trust Fund and Naseni tax or police tax? Because they don't have enough budgetary allocation. And the basic reason is that the revenue is too low. But by the time we increase our current revenue generation by about 500%, that is times 5 of what we are currently generating, you will find out that it is possible for every government parastatal to be allocated their desired budgetary allocation. And with that one, there will not be need for any earmarked taxes. So the economy will be better stabilized, and the handshake between the fiscal and monetary authorities of the country will all be better for it, rather than what we are still facing now, because there's a lot of dysfunction in the working of both the monetary as well as fiscal policy aspects of the governance.
And if not, the last one was whether this would mean that, at least to an extent, borrowings will be limited.
Why do you need to borrow? For example, you are currently generating 1 billion naira, and under the proposed tax bills, you'll be generating 5 billion naira. Currently, as I said earlier on, we are funding debt with 96% of of our revenue. But assuming you now raise that revenue by five times, you will have enough to pay off the existing debt, and you will not have costs to go for further debt. So we are looking at a mega situation rather than the current micro level we are treating our revenue generation. So there will not be need for going into more borrowing.
Thank you so much for your time. You have really broken this down. I'm sure that a lot of Nigerians would have learned a lot just from listening. And I hope that those who have agitations as well would have listened to how you broke this down and get more understanding on the bill. The bills. Managing partner of Gabe Fashotor and Co. and former president, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, Gabriel Fashotor. Thank you so much for your time. A pleasure to have you on.
You're welcome.
All right, let's take a break now. When we return, we'll be looking at the anti-corruption war in the country. Stay with us.